Last month I was standing in my own kitchen, staring at my pantry shelf, and I noticed something. The same jar of peanut butter I always buy, the same bag of coffee, the same bottle of olive oil, but the receipts didn't match what I remembered from a year ago. I started digging because something felt off. And once you start pulling that thread, you can't stop. What I found wasn't a conspiracy. It was patterns, quiet ones, the kind most people never notice until the price tag changes and they just accept it. So today, I'm walking you through 15 pantry staples that are still cheap right now, but probably won't be for much longer. Some of these will surprise you. One of them, number 6, genuinely caught me off guard. And I promise I'll get to it. If you want to stay ahead of these shifts before they hit your grocery bill, go ahead and subscribe now, because this is exactly the kind of thing I track every week. Let's get into it. Item number 1. Coffee. Coffee is the one everybody feels first, because most of us drink it every single day. Global coffee prices have been climbing for a while now, driven by weather problems in major growing regions like Brazil and Vietnam. Droughts and unpredictable frost have hit harvests hard, and that pressure moves down the chain slowly, then all at once. Industry reports have been flagging tightening supply for specialty and commodity-grade beans alike, and roasters have already started adjusting the size of bags instead of the price, which is its own kind of warning sign. When I checked my usual grocery run last month, my regular bag of ground coffee was the same price, but it weighed less than it did a year ago. I almost didn't notice. That's the part that bothers me. If you drink coffee regularly, this is a good time to buy a little extra when it's on sale and store it properly in an airtight container in a cool, dark spot. Whole beans hold up longer than pre-ground, so if you can grind at home, that buys you more room. This is one of those things you don't think about until your morning routine suddenly costs more, and that adds up fast over a year. Item number 2. Cocoa and chocolate. Cocoa has had one of the wildest few years of any pantry ingredient, and most shoppers still don't realize how deep it goes. West Africa produces the majority of the world's cocoa, and crop disease, along with extreme weather, has repeatedly hit yields there, pushing raw cocoa costs to levels that have rattled the entire chocolate industry. Trade publications have noted that manufacturers have been quietly shrinking chocolate bars and swapping in cheaper fillers rather than raising sticker prices outright, because they know consumers notice price jumps more than they notice smaller portions. I actually compared an old chocolate bar wrapper I had saved with a new one from the same brand, just out of curiosity. The size difference was small, but real. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. If baking or snacking with chocolate matters to you, stock up on baking cocoa and chips when you see a genuine sale, and check unit pricing instead of the sticker price, because that's where the real story is hiding. Chocolate feels like a small indulgence, but it's becoming one of the clearest examples of costs being passed to shoppers in disguise. Item number 3. Olive oil. Olive oil has already gone through a rough stretch, and while prices have eased slightly from their peak, they're still nowhere near where they used to sit. Mediterranean droughts hit Spain and Italy especially hard in recent growing seasons, and those two countries supply a huge share of the olive oil on American shelves. Analysts covering the olive oil market have pointed out that even a partial recovery in harvests takes years to fully show up in retail prices because of how contracts and reserves work through the supply chain. I switched to buying olive oil in the large tin instead of small bottles a while back, mostly by accident, and it turned out to be one of the better financial decisions I made without even trying. If you use olive oil regularly, buying in bulk when you find a fair price, and storing it away from light and heat will protect both your wallet and the oil itself, since heat and sunlight degrade it quickly anyway. This is one of those ingredients where waiting for prices to go back to normal probably isn't a realistic plan anymore. Item number 4. Canned tomatoes. Canned tomatoes feel like the most boring item on this list, and that's exactly why people overlook what's happening with them. Aluminum and steel tariffs, along with rising can manufacturing costs, have been squeezing packaged food producers, And canned goods are especially exposed because the packaging itself is a big part of the cost. Food industry coverage has repeatedly mentioned that canned goods are one of the categories most sensitive to metal pricing, more than people realize, since the can often costs nearly as much to produce as what's inside it. I used to grab canned tomatoes without even glancing at the price, because they were always just $1 or so. Now, I actually compare them against the Tetra Pak or jarred versions before I decide. Buy a few extra cans now, while pricing is still reasonable, and consider glass jarred alternatives when you see them discounted, since jars are less exposed to the same packaging cost pressure that cans are facing. It's a small line item, but if you cook with canned tomatoes often, this one adds up quietly over the months. And before we go further, I want to remind you, stick around for number 6, because it's not one most people expect at all. Item number 5. Peanut butter. Peanut butter has been sneaky about this, because the price per jar hasn't moved dramatically, but the jars have. Peanut crop yields have been inconsistent due to weather swings in the major growing states, and peanut processors have been dealing with higher costs for everything from oil to packaging to transportation. Consumer complaint boards and shopping forums have been full of people noticing the same thing I did: jars that feel lighter, spreads that run out faster than they used to. I actually weighed my jar once, out of pure curiosity, next to an older one I had saved the label from. It wasn't a huge difference, but it was there, and it wasn't something the label made obvious. Check the ounces printed on the jar, not just the price, and consider buying the larger tub size if you go through peanut butter regularly, since bulk sizes often shrink less aggressively than smaller ones. This is one of those pantry basics where paying attention to the fine print actually protects your budget. Item number 6. Vanilla extract. Okay, this is the one I told you about, and I genuinely didn't expect it when I started looking into this topic. Real vanilla extract comes almost entirely from vanilla beans grown in a handful of regions, mainly Madagascar, and that supply chain is fragile in a way most people never think about. A cyclone or a bad growing season in that one region can send global vanilla prices swinging wildly, and it has happened more than once in the last decade, sometimes multiplying prices several times over in a single year. I spoke with someone who works in specialty baking supply, and they told me flatly that pure vanilla extract is one of the most volatile ingredients in the entire pantry category, far more than people assume from something that just sits quietly on a shelf. If pure vanilla extract matters to your baking, buy an extra bottle now while it's calm, and store it in a cool, dark cabinet, because it actually has a long shelf life if kept properly. This is the item that made me realize how many boring pantry staples are sitting on genuinely unstable supply chains, and it's why I wanted to make this video in the first place. Item number 7. Orange juice. Orange juice has been dealing with a citrus disease problem for years now, and it isn't going away anytime soon. Citrus greening disease has devastated groves in Florida especially, cutting production dramatically, and that has pushed juice makers to rely more heavily on imported concentrate to fill the gap. Agricultural reports have described the domestic citrus decline as one of the steepest of any major American crop in recent memory, and recovery timelines are measured in years, not months. I noticed my usual carton of orange juice creeping up in price gradually, a little at a time, the kind of change that's easy to miss if you're not paying close attention to your receipts. If juice is a staple in your house, watch for sales and consider buying frozen concentrate as a backup option, since it stores longer and tends to be more price stable than the fresh carton. This is one of those quiet structural shifts that isn't going to reverse itself soon, so it's worth planning around rather than waiting out. Item number 8. Maple syrup. Maple syrup is regional in a way most pantry staples aren't, and that makes it more sensitive to weather than people expect. Warmer winters have been shortening the maple sap season in parts of the northeastern United States and Canada, and a shorter season means less syrup overall, even before any other cost pressure gets added on top. Producers and trade groups covering the maple industry have flagged shifting weather patterns as a genuine long-term concern for supply, not just a one-year blip. I grew up with real maple syrup on the table every weekend, and comparing prices now to what I remember growing up, the gap is bigger than I expected. If you use real maple syrup regularly, buying the larger bottle when it's discounted and storing it in the fridge once opened will help it last, and it genuinely does keep for a long time once refrigerated. This is one of those ingredients where the cheap alternative syrup starts looking more tempting every year, and that's exactly the shift worth watching for. Item number 9. Canned tuna and seafood. Canned tuna feels like a pantry staple that never changes, but the fishing industry behind it is under real pressure. Fuel costs for commercial fishing fleets have risen, along with stricter catch regulations in several major tuna fishing regions, and both of those pressures get passed along the supply chain eventually. Seafood industry coverage has repeatedly noted that canned tuna pricing tends to lag behind these cost increases by many months, which means the calm you're seeing right now may just be a delay, not a stable price. I keep a small stock of canned tuna for quick meals, and when I went to restock recently, I noticed the price had ticked up more than I expected for something that usually barely moves. Stock up when you see a genuine multi-can discount and check the ounces per can rather than assuming it matches what you remember, since portion sizes have quietly shifted here too. This is a pantry basic people rely on for a quick, affordable meal, which makes any creeping cost increase feel especially personal. Item number 10. Rice feels like the most stable food on earth, until you actually look at global trade data. Export restrictions from some of the world's largest rice-producing countries, combined with unpredictable monsoon seasons, have created real volatility in global rice prices over the past couple of years. Trade analysts have pointed out that even small policy shifts in major exporting nations can ripple through international rice pricing surprisingly fast, because so much of the global supply comes from just a few countries. I buy rice in bulk normally, and when I compared the price per pound against what I paid a year or two ago, it was a noticeably bigger jump than I expected from something so basic. If rice is a staple in your household, buying a larger bag now and storing it in a sealed, airtight container will keep it fresh for a long time and protect you from smaller, more frequent price bumps. Rice is one of those foods people assume will always be cheap, and that assumption is exactly why this shift catches so many people off guard. Item number 11. Wheat flour and bread flour sits quietly behind almost everything in your pantry. From bread to baked goods, and wheat markets have been anything but quiet lately. Weather disruptions in major wheat-growing regions, along with ongoing global supply chain shifts, have kept wheat prices elevated compared to where they sat several years ago. Baking industry publications have noted that bread and flour producers have been absorbing some of these costs through smaller loaf sizes and reformulated recipes rather than sharp price hikes, at least for now. I noticed my usual loaf of bread felt a little lighter one week, and when I checked the label, the weight had genuinely gone down slightly from what I remembered buying before. Buy flour in bulk when it's on sale and store it in a sealed container, ideally in the freezer if you have room, since that extends its usable life significantly beyond the pantry shelf. Flour is one of those invisible staples baked into dozens of products you buy without even thinking about it, which is exactly why this one matters more than people assume. Item number 12. Black pepper and spices. Spices are one of the most overlooked categories on any pantry shelf, and the supply chains behind them are more fragile than people realize. Black pepper, cinnamon, and several other common spices are grown in a small number of tropical regions, and weather disruptions or crop diseases there can tighten global supply quickly. Commodity trade reports have flagged black pepper specifically as one of the more volatile spice markets in recent years, with prices swinging noticeably based on harvest conditions in just a couple of countries. I keep a small spice rack, and when I went to replace my pepper grinder refill recently, the price difference from the last time I bought one genuinely surprised me. Buy whole peppercorns instead of pre-ground when you can, since they last longer and hold flavor better, and stock up a little when you see a fair price rather than waiting until you're completely out. Spices are cheap enough individually that people rarely notice the creep, but across a full spice rack, it adds up more than you'd expect. Item number 13. Honey. Honey has a supply problem that most people have never even heard about, and it's a serious one. Bee colony losses have been significant in recent years due to disease, pesticide exposure, and habitat loss, and fewer healthy colonies directly means less honey produced domestically. Beekeeping associations and agricultural researchers have described colony losses as one of the more concerning long-term trends affecting domestic honey supply, with some seasons seeing losses far above historical averages. I switched from the cheapest honey brand to a slightly pricier one a while back, mostly because I noticed the cheap option kept getting smaller for the same price, which felt like a quiet signal in itself. If you use honey regularly, buying a larger jar when you find a reasonable price and checking that it's genuinely pure honey rather than a diluted blend will protect both your wallet and your kitchen staple. Honey is one of those products where the story behind the shortage is honestly more concerning than the price tag itself. Item number 14. Butter and dairy. Butter doesn't always make these lists, but the dairy supply chain has been under real pressure that's easy to miss. Feed costs for dairy farms have risen, and herd sizes have shrunk in some regions due to both economic pressure and drought affecting pastureland, which tightens milk supply overall. Agricultural economists tracking dairy markets have noted that butter, because it's a byproduct of the broader milk supply chain, tends to see sharper price swings than fluid milk itself during periods of tight supply. I started buying butter in bulk when I saw a real sale a few months back, mostly on instinct, and I'm glad I did once I compared it to the shelf price just a few weeks later. Watch for sales on butter and buy extra when you see them, since it freezes well for months without losing quality, which makes stocking up a genuinely practical move here. Butter is one of those staples baked into so many recipes that a steady price increase barely registers until your whole grocery bill feels heavier. Item number 15. Sugar feels like the most permanent, unchanging item in any pantry. And that's exactly why people don't see this one coming. Global sugar production has been affected by drought in key growing regions like Brazil and India, and export policies in some producing countries have added another layer of unpredictability to global supply. Commodity market coverage has pointed out that sugar prices tend to be especially sensitive to weather in just a handful of countries, since so much of the world's supply is concentrated there. I buy sugar in bulk for baking, and when I compared this year's price to a couple of years back, the increase was bigger than almost anything else on this list, which honestly surprised me the most. If baking or regular sugar use is part of your routine, buying a larger bag when it's reasonably priced and storing it in a sealed, dry container will protect you from both price creep and moisture issues over time. Sugar closes this list because it's the clearest example of something everyone assumes will always be cheap, right up until it isn't. The pattern. If you noticed a theme running through all 15 of these, you're paying closer attention than most people ever will. Weather, packaging costs, and quiet portion shrinking keep showing up again and again across completely different products. None of this is a conspiracy. It's just how supply chains work when they get stretched thin, and companies would rather shrink a package than raise a price you'll notice. The people who do well here aren't the ones panicking. They're the ones who noticed early, bought a little extra of what they actually use, and stored it properly. Most people will notice these changes eventually, usually when they're standing at the register wondering why their total feels higher than it used to. You don't have to be one of them, and that's really the whole point of paying attention to something like this. If this was useful, go ahead and subscribe, because I track shifts like this every week, and I'd rather you hear about them from me before they show up on your receipt. Drop a comment and let me know which item on this list surprised you the most. I read every single one. And I'll see you in the next video, because there's always something nobody's talking about yet.